We're going to get started because, very frankly, I want to give as much of you as much time as we possibly can. This hearing, shadow hearing or meeting, is called because of my great concern about what is happening at IRS. My great concern at what's happening in Treasury generally. Beyond that, my general concern as to what is being done to undermine the effectiveness and responsiveness of the federal government to and for the people. I talked to Richie Neal, who's a relatively short time in this place, I think 35 years, and who has become one of my close friends over the years. And Mike Thompson will be coming as well, and Don Byer, who's on the IRS subcommittee in Ways and Means, is here as well. Mark Pocan and Sanford Bishop. We expect the others who are named who have said they would be here. Hopefully there will be. There's a lot going on, as you know. Much of which is not very good. But it's my premise that the IRS is underfunded, understaffed, and underappreciated. The good news is not underappreciated by the lady who's coming in the room, who's the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. Swazi is now coming in the room, who's a member of the Ways and Means Committee and a member of the IRS. So this is an unusual hearing. I got this idea really from Chair Laura, who had a similar hearing on education subjects and children's subjects not too long ago. I asked the chair of the committee to chairman of the subcommittee, in which I serve, the Financial Services and General Government Committee. They'll have a hearing and have the IRS Commissioner present. There was an acting IRS Commissioner who is also Deputy Secretary, as I think most of you know. And frankly, I say as an aside, with the new IRS Commissioner, it may have been an entertaining hearing, although very funny. But I thought it was eventually essential for us to have a better knowledge of what we're doing. My conviction is Musk and Doge knew how to do it. They knew nothing about the consequences. I'm not talking just at IRS or Treasury, I'm talking across the board. So I talked to Richie Neal, I talked to my chair, Laura, and to Mike Thompson. And they all agreed that this was something that we needed to do to inform the public. Now, I showed all of you, this is, I think, the first hearing. I've been here 44 years. This is the first hearing where I've read every word of all of your testimony. And I think it's extraordinarily instructive. Now, let me make a few brief remarks, then we're going to get underway, because this is not a hearing in the formal sense. I just want to set parameters. When Mr. Lauro obviously wants to say something briefly at the beginning, and Mr. Neal does. He'll be here about 20 minutes later, he said. I want to thank all of you for being here. Members, you will be impressed not only with the verbal testimony, but you ought to take as a primer course on what we're doing on IRS and Treasury and read, as I have, this testimony, because everybody at this table spent time preparing testimony, knowing full well this is not. I want to tell everybody we are going to have a video recording of this. We're not going to have a direct record at first, but everything you say will be recorded. The reason is I want that preserved so that we can give that or show that to other members. Our Republican colleagues have been reluctant to hold public hearings in the Trump administration's assault on the IRS. So we decided to host our own briefing. The American people deserve answers, and we hope to provide them with some today. And I wanted this to be the authorizers, who think they're the most important, and the appropriators, who clearly know we're the most important. So there's not full agreement on that question, but there's full agreement that we need to make sure we get IRS right. We believe in fiscal responsibility. A number of you mentioned the debt in your comments and what we have to do with fiscal. We know that fiscal responsibility certainly involves looking at spending, but also crucially at revenue. For years, the IRS has been desperately underfunded and understaffed, leaving hundreds of billions of dollars in legally owed taxes uncollected, and therefore placing more of a burden on those taxpayers who do fully comply. Ms. Olson, you made that comment a number of times, as did others. Now, this graph shows how we have, in effect, tanked enforcement, particularly on the law. Filers have gone way up, and the budget has gone way down. And this is, if you're over $1 million, you've gone from approximately 9% chance of being audited to 0.6%. While 85+% of our filers pay their taxes every week, every bi-week, or every month. And they're almost 100% compliant. All of you know that. I just say that for whatever record will ultimately be watched. As this graph shows, I told you what it shows. The agency has more work and fewer resources to do it. That's on this graph. Again, the budget. This is the real budget, if you count for inflation. That's what's happened to the budget. Though annual IRS appropriations have nominally stayed even, in reality they have not. And I want to call everybody's attention here to page 4 of Ms. Olson's testimony, in which she points out that taxpayer services in this budget, counting for the IRA expectation. And one of you mentioned the necessity for a longer term, at least 3 years. Remember which one of you? I read it, but sustained spending. Taxpayer services, they say have been increased by some 30%, down 7.4%. Enforcement services, down, enforcement 45.9, cut in half from what the IRA provided. Technology and operations, which they claim is going to solve the problem, 58.2% down in actual funding. Overall, a 44% reduction in IRS's resources, both in staff and in money. In 2010, the IRS examination rate of people, I told you, 1 million or more, near 9%, now down to 6 to 10%. In fiscal year 22, that figure ticked up to 1%. There was a new administration, and there was a little bit of an increase, but not where it needs to be. Even still, an estimated $606 billion. Now, very frankly, we have anywhere from $200 billion at the very low end to a significantly higher figure than $600 billion in legally owed taxes, which go uncollected every year. Now, as I point out all the time, I know Mike, you do, Rose, I'm sure you, and the members of the committee, you keep spending, somebody's got to pay that bill. And you pay that bill either in interest, which is now about $1 trillion, more than we spend on our national security, So that if the people who owe don't pay, the people who we voluntarily take money pay more. I say involuntarily, they have to pay it. In that sense, we pay our taxes because it's withdrawn from our wages. IRS data suggests that every $1 invested in enforcement yields $7 of revenue in return. Your testimony will reflect that is perhaps an average, but it could go as high as 12 or more, depending upon the level of taxpayers' income. Crucially, research from Harvard and the Treasury accounts found that when it's targeted at the top 10% earners, $1 gets you $12 back. There's nobody in the Congress of the United States who would make that kind of investment, except in IRS. That yield is so high in part because of the deterrent effect, which you speak to, and I think you speak to as well. The two of you, everybody probably speaks to that. Problem with reading all five, I didn't have the absolute catalog in my brain. Democrats took action to address this issue. The Yale budget estimated that the $80 billion we included in the Inflation Reduction Act for the IRS would have led to a net increase in revenue of $637 billion over the next decade. That, I think, is at the low side. Republicans, however, sought to undo this progress at this turn. This hearing is not about going after the Trump administration or going after Republicans. This hearing is to get information so that we can be well informed and explain to them and to the American people what we're leaving on the table that is owed. No tax increases. Trump's recent purge of nonpartisan federal employees has also badly hurt the IRS. Now there's some in, some out, some came back, so we're not sure exactly where it's going to land. But we'll see what the courts do, and we'll see what the administration does, and see what Secretary Bessent does. Yale Budget Lab, an extraordinary organization, headed up by Dr. Sarin. Yale Budget Lab estimates that doing so will lead to between $395 billion and a $2.4 trillion in lost revenue over the next decade. Put that in perspective, the Senate's tax package in Trump's one big beautiful bill cost $4.2 trillion over the next decade. Evidently, it wasn't enough for Trump to lower taxes on the wealthy. They also want to make sure that no more than 6/10 of the returns, otherwise known as 99.4% of those who have over $1 million, not having their taxes looked at all. What does that mean? I made the analogy the other day in committee about you see a cop on the side of the road, there's not one of us that doesn't automatically just knee-jerk, globally in light, lift our foot off the accelerator. Same thing's going to happen when you hear 6/10%. I'll take that chance. All of this is all this to a vital agency that is already desperately under-resourced. Attack on the IRS is an attack on America's fiscal health. This administration exposed the debt the American people, and I say this administration, we have all been responsible for exposing this debt. We want to spend money on different things. And a tax expenditure is an expense. So I thank all of you, and I thank the members. And I'll yield quickly to Ms. DeLauro, and then to Mr. Thompson.
Good morning. Thank you very, very much for being here. And I just wanted to say a thank you to the ranking member of Appropriations for the Financial Services Subcommittee. This is an important hearing, and we take it very seriously. And I want to say a thank you to our colleagues from Ways and Means, to Congressman Thompson and Congressman Neal, who will be here. And I just wanted to, I read every bit of the testimony as well, because first of all, I want to just say a thank you to you, and this is very, very personal. It is Ways and Means staff in the room as well. We were told at the outset of the child tax credit, one, there were so many people opposed to it at the outset we couldn't do it, but we worked that out through Ways and Means, and then we were told that this couldn't be worked out monthly, on a monthly basis. Well, by God, for I say a year, but the 6 months, every single month, those checks went out, and it is the largest tax cut for the middle class families that we have seen, and it took half of our kids out of poverty in this nation and lowered the hunger rate. So I have all but praise for the IRS and the work that it does. But this is what we're facing, and what we have been facing in the last couple of years is chronic underfunding of the IRS. And I say the last few years because I've watched what we tried to do in a prior administration in terms of really providing a substantial amount of funds in order for you to be able to do what you all speak about, is your enforcement portfolio and your services portfolio, and to try to even those out. But there have been, and I'll be clear, an onslaught of attacks on the IRS from the White House and from my Republican colleagues. We can't get away from it, and it is politics, but that's the fact. I want to thank each one for being here. It's important for our nation's governance, our national security, for every program and service provided to the American people, that we have a strong, secure, and well-supported IRS. An underfunded IRS means slower processing of Americans' tax returns, the delays to crucial benefits like the child tax credit, and we're going to continue that fight. And I hope the machinery is in place, because when we get it back, we're going to get the checks out on a monthly basis like you all did in the past. But it also means those with the most resources, billionaires, powerful corporations. They can often escape scrutiny, avoid paying tax, and when the IRS cannot afford to ensure they are meeting their obligations. Democrats in the Congress have made several investments in IRS through annual appropriations and in the Inflation Reduction Act to ensure it has the resources to collect taxes owed and to improve services. And indeed, there's been a great progress in collecting taxes owed from delinquent millionaires and billionaires, and in modernizing the IRS for the American people. With the investment that Democrats made in the IRS, the government was able to collect over $1 billion from about 1,600 millionaires who have not paid their taxes. I'm sure this will come out in your testimony. I'm getting tired of hearing some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about the spending problem, the spending problem, the spending problem. Nowhere is there a discussion of the revenue problem that we have in this country, and I'd like to get your take on the revenue problem that we have and how do we best correct that. The IRS has cracked down on the abuse of corporate jets for personal travel, launched audits of the 60 largest corporations with average assets of $24 billion. With our investments, the IRS significantly improved customer service. We launched more digital tools in the last 2 years than the previous 20. We gave more people choices in how they do their taxes and interact with IRS offices. We piloted a direct file, and I won't even go through the debate we had in the it was astounding, the people who were opposed to direct file. Mind-blowing. And that allows taxpayers in 25 states with simple returns to file for free directly with the IRS. Simply no good reason that American taxpayers are all but forced to use costly private services to be sure they are paying their taxes correctly. The government, at a minimum, should be able to tell taxpayers if they are paying the correct amount. Yet, this administration, and yes, the Republicans in the Congress, want the American people to be beholden to expensive tax preparation companies in order to simply pay their taxes. Rolling the investments back serve tax prep corporations and those who seek to escape paying the tax they owe, getting a free ride on the backs of honest and hardworking Americans. Remember where we were before this investment. At least 55 of the largest corporations in America paid zero, absolutely nothing in federal taxes on their profits following the 2017 Trump tax cut. In 2021, at least 55 of the largest corporations in America in a year where they took in over $40 billion in pre-tax income paid no federal corporate income tax. Nike, Hewlett-Packard, Dish Network, 0 federal income tax, profiting from the backs of honest American families. And Elon Musk, Tesla, at one point was valued at $1 trillion, avoided paying federal income tax for 3 years. You think about that, a $1 trillion company pays nothing in tax, and yet Republicans just voted for more tax breaks for billionaires like Elon Musk. On average audits, each dollar of IRS spending yields just over $2, a notable return on investment. But for the wealthiest, 0.1%, audits produce nearly triple the return, with each dollar yielding over $6 in revenue. Throughout the debate on the IRS funding, and I will conclude here, we hear some members of the majority improperly call the IRS collecting tax that is legally owed a, quote, tax increase, end quote. Nonsense. We protect honest, hardworking taxpaying Americans by ensuring the wealthiest individuals and corporations are paying the tax that they owe. We need to ensure that the IRS has the resources to complete its mission. Foolish for a business to slash its accounts receivable department in order to be able to save money. U.S. government shouldn't be doing that right. I want to say a thank you for holding the briefing and for all of today's witnesses and for appearing here for your work. Help us to be able to navigate the revenue shortage that we have today, which could carry us a long way in trying to meet some of the needs that we have. I thank you. I yield back. I'm going to take it.
Chairman Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoyer, for putting this together. This is incredible. What an all-star lineup of witnesses that you've had and members. It's a high honor to be with all of you. And I want to thank the witnesses for appearing today and sharing your views on the importance of investing in the IRS and how those investments have real impact on the lives of every American. We made great efforts, as has been mentioned, in the Inflation Reduction Act to provide funding to the IRS to improve customer service, go after tax cheats, and ensure overall fairness in the enforcement of our tax code. In the same bill, we made an historic investment in clean energy while cutting costs for families, and it created record job growth and manufacturing investment across the country, all while fighting the climate crisis. We can't build a clean economy and sustain this job growth while gutting these investments and the very agency that administers them. The American people should understand underfunding the IRS is not an accident, it's sabotage. It's an effort to ensure that well-off taxpayers who can afford armies of sophisticated tax accountants and lawyers can get away with paying far less than they owe in taxes, all while everyday Americans are left holding the proverbial bag. When the IRS can't do its job, those hardworking Americans and small businesses are the ones who suffer. They suffer when they wait for hours on the phone to get their questions answered, when their letters go unresponded to, when their refunds are bogged down in endless review times. When cuts are made to critical services, they're not made evenly. Those who are struggling the most always bear the brunt. When the ultra-wealthy and the large multinational corporations are given free passes and hardworking Americans get a busy signal or stuck on hold, that reflects our government's values. Make no mistake about it. This is not about saving money, and it's not about efficiency. The administration is not cutting funding to the IRS because it's broken. They're cutting funding to the IRS because it works. It works to hold tax cheats accountable, and that's what they oppose. If the administration wanted to focus on waste, the last thing they would do is cut the funding for the IRS. As a matter of fact, I would submit that those cuts are actually fraud, waste, and abuse. It's estimated that over $600 billion in taxes go unpaid each year. It's not a small amount of money. Those funds could support our schools, enhance healthcare programs, address climate change, and much more. By underfunding the IRS, we're undercutting every federal program that serves Americans. My constituents and all Americans deserve a government that works for them, not just a government that works for the well-off and the well-connected. I look forward to hearing your testimony. I have questions, and again, Mr. Hoyer, thank you very much for assembling this impressive group. I yield back.
Thank you very much for being here. Now, Mr. Neal, as I said, was going to be a little late. He had another engagement, but I know he'll break it when he comes in if he wants to make comments. We're going to start from my left, right, or your right to left, whichever makes you feel more comfortable. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm not going to go into biographies. I think everybody knows who you are. But you have performed better than my voice. I don't know what's in the air, but it's getting to my throat. You performed extraordinary service for our country, and I appreciate it. So, John, we'll start with you, Commissioner Koskinen. We'll start with you, Fred, Danny, and then the doctor and Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Congressman Hoyer, and other members of Congress. My name is John Koskinen, and I was Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service from 2013 to 2017. I'll start by saying that I'm very concerned that the actions taken by this administration threaten the independence of the IRS and its ability to run a successful filing season starting in January. At the same time, I think there's been a missed opportunity to make important improvements in agency operations. Had the administration worked carefully and in an organized way, much as the Reinventing Government initiative did 30 years ago, real progress could have been made. Instead, we're faced with an announced goal of cutting the number of IRS employees by anywhere from 30 to 40,000 people, with as many as 25,000 already gone or on their way out. The argument has been made that these personnel cuts are necessary because the IRS has been overstaffed and can do the work with fewer people. The facts don't support that assertion. In 2000, there were approximately 97,000 IRS employees. While I was commissioner, we started out with 87,000 employees as a result of budget cuts over time. With the continued underfunding of the agency, we had no choice but to leave vacant positions when people left. The result was a loss of another 10,000 employees and what was clearly abysmal taxpayer service. Only 10% of calls to the agency were answered. In addition, as a result of the loss of over 25% of revenue agents and officers, audit rates declined, especially for large, complicated businesses and returns. Thanks to recent funding increases that you've already heard about, the IRS under Commissioner Werfel has been able to return the IRS to the staffing levels of 25 years ago. This has allowed the agency to handle 40 million more returns, administrate a more complicated tax code, restore excellent taxpayer service, and support increased tax compliant activities. This was not an overstaffed agency, but one returned to appropriate levels of employees to achieve success. It's important to remember that the Internal Revenue Service now collects over $5 trillion and funds over 95% of government activities. I think it's nonsensical to maintain, on the one hand, that you're concerned about the size of the deficit, and on the other hand, to undermine the agency charged with collecting taxes owed. The argument is made that increased use of artificial intelligence will significantly improve the operations of the IRS with far fewer employees, and also quickly solve the information technology challenges facing the agency. That may be true over time, but it's not going to be possible for the next filing season to overcome the loss of thousands of employees, including many in the information technology department. This is especially true as additional, complicated changes in the tax code for this tax year are being considered on the Hill. My concern about all of this is that notwithstanding the commitment and great work of the IRS employees, the next filing season runs the risk of being severely compromised with poor taxpayer service, declining revenue collection, and a loss of confidence in the agency. A related threat to the collection of government revenues is the loss of confidence by the public in the fairness and security of the tax collection process. The IRS estimate of the net tax gap, taxes owed but not paid every year, has gone from slightly over $400 billion a year when I was commissioner to just over $600 billion reported this year. Much of the reported net tax gap is uncollectible due to bankruptcies and other challenges. But a conservative estimate is that 1/3 of the tax gap is the result of non-filing or underpayment by taxpayers with the means to meet their tax obligations. That means we're losing $200 billion a year in foregone revenues every year with compliant taxpayers bearing the burden. Another challenge to tax compliance is the threat to the security of personal information taxpayers provide with their tax returns. The IRS has been committed over the years to protecting taxpayer information. This has been reinforced by a criminal statute that taxpayer information is not to be shared or even viewed except for approved tax administration purposes. The attempt by the new administration to access tax information generally was fortunately frustrated. But the agreement to share information about tax returns from undocumented aliens threatens billions of dollars of annual revenues. Undocumented aliens file almost $70 billion in tax payments every year. I've heard reports that, not surprisingly, at least some of these taxpayers no longer want to file tax returns or pay taxes. The loss of tax payments could run into the billions. From a broader perspective, for years it has been agreed that tax policy is the domain of the Congress, the White House, and the Treasury Department. Tax administration is the domain and responsibility of the Internal Revenue Service. When those outside the agency appear to be able to control tax administration, confidence in the tax system will decline even more. Section 7217 of the U.S. Code is entitled Prohibition on Executive Branch Influence over Taxpayer Audits and Other Investigations. The statute specifically covers the President, the Vice President, any employee of the Executive Office of the President, and any employee of the Executive Office of the Vice President. When there is public discussion by those in the White House about taking away tax exemptions of various organizations or directions to that effect, the non-political nature and independence of the IRS is undermined. There are some positive signs that will help the IRS. The Treasury Department has announced that Donald Ford is being nominated to be the Chief Counsel of the agency, a position he held with distinction some years ago. Don is an experienced tax lawyer and administrator and is grounded in the need for the agency to be non-political and fair-minded in its approach to tax administration. I also understand that the new commissioner, Billy Long, was very popular during his 12 years in the Congress. I would hope that he can use those connections to help ensure that the IRS has the necessary funding to provide excellent taxpayer service and appropriate and effective tax compliance activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neal, Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, has arrived, and as I said, I'm just going to give him a short time. He's going to take whatever time he needs, but to make a statement.
Thanks to Steny for convening us. Thanks to Steny for convening us, and thanks to all of you for participating. Really a talented lot. I worked with you and have the highest praise for what it is that you've done. Not only the independence of the IRS, the professional manner in which you handle concerns that are expressed by members of Congress. And the other consideration that I always ask is a bit of a rhetorical question. You've all heard me raise it with you, and that is the compliance rate in America, voluntary compliance rate, how many people pay their taxes on time. And the other point that obviously we were major authors of the Inflation Reduction Act. We thought that increasing tax compliance and increasing audits for very wealthy people was a very important consideration. And at the same time, the complexities that Congress frequently creates in the code is best measured by having ample opportunity and professional status at the agency and making sure that people comply with it. In his absence, I also want to point out a very important footnote, and that is it's former Commissioner Reddick who asked us for the money. And Commissioner Werfel at the time implemented it. Would recommend that people read the New Yorker piece this week on what DOJ did at the IRS and how they handled many of the issues and how ill-informed they were. They went to the IRS, and I thought that Commissioner Werfel and the others were terrific to work with. Talked to him in the closing days of his time. But I also want to make the following point that I think is really essential, and that is we could have accomplished a lot of greater efficiencies if we simply had left the legislation in place. Let it rest for 3 or 4 years and then go back and review it. But compliance ratios are important, and largely, I think, closing note, people understand that if there's a group that's not paying their taxes, that means they have to pay more. So I want to thank you, because I worked with all of you, and have the highest regard for the manner in which you oversaw the agency. And this goes back even before you. I mean, that is one of the advantages of long service. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now we'll go to another IRS commissioner. He was the commissioner in with Nixon, Reagan, and George H.W. Bush. He wasn't commissioner all the time, but he was at the IRS and one of the most knowledgeable tax experts in the country. Commissioner, we're very glad you're here. Thank you. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. And I wish to congratulate the chair.
Is your light on?
Yes.
It's sort of close.
There we go.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
When we talk about budget, we tend to talk about how much. But when you think about budget, there are a bunch of questions. How are we getting that money to spend? That's a question. Then, how are we spending it? And then, what are we getting for what we're spending? And stuff I talked about today is gonna be more from that perspective, because I still live in that world. And in reverse order, I was IRS Commissioner under President Bush. That's when I learned about the funding that you were going to focus on. Before that, it was President Reagan, where I learned about effective tax administration. And going all the way back to President Nixon. 55 years ago, that's when I learned. And that has been my obsession for 55 years. Now, I'm going to start with a note of optimism. I guess I should maybe apologize. But based on what I've seen, learned, and what I know, I have no question but that Secretary Bessent, Deputy Secretary Faulconer are committed to, an AI-based, tech-driven tax administration system that will deliver the following: compliance, dramatic reduction of burden on everyday small businesses and working families, and secure confidential data. Now, aspirations are reality, but I think they are genuine aspirations. I think they are absolutely correct that our future is going to be driven by AI, but not by, getting all my adjectives, billionaire AI people. It's going to be start with Bush and the IRS Commission. This is truth. It's truth taught by John. It's truth taught by Commissioner Rosati. It's truth taught by Commissioner Werfel. There is absolutely no way to run an enterprise if you don't know what your current year budget is, you don't know what your next year budget is, and they just flop around. That's the world I lived in when I worked for Commissioner Bush. Now, the IRS bucket of funding, as I understand it, please correct me, is enforcement, service, operations, and technology. Let's start with enforcement. I want to be as clear as I can be. Enforcement is not and never has been an end in and of itself. Thank you, Chairman Neal. The tax system is about compliance, not enforcement as a joy. You just got to do it. It has to happen. But it's also expensive. It's also intrusive. It's also burdensome. And in many ways, most importantly, it is one of many tools to get to compliance. And it only works if it's coupled with transparency, if it's coupled with cooperation, and importantly, it's coupled with resolution strategies. And that's where it needs to be. In contrast, service is an end in itself. Because that's the American people. That's the working families. That's the small businesses. And the system has to. They are we the people. So it has to work. My personal view, and this is candid, I believe there is an inappropriate overemphasis on enforcement to the degradation of service. And I'm talking about working families and small businesses. It is estimated that they spend somewhere between $6 billion and $10 billion a year unscrambling messes with the IRS. That's what's happening. And then we get technology. And the world I live in, there are lots of folks doing technology and AI. I don't mess with rich guys. I work with folks who are trying to better deliver clean energy, better to deliver ways of resolving disputes with the IRS. They are doing technology now that would dramatically improve the interaction. But if it's not two-way technology, it ain't never gonna work. And going back to what the Secretary, Deputy Secretary, I believe, are committed to, I have no question that they're committed to it. But to get there, they will have to be properly funded. It ain't gonna work without the funding. And also the support of Congress and the support of the private sector. What needs to happen from a budgetary perspective, in my judgment, is twofold. One, give the IRS Commissioner, each one of these folks, the ability to move funding among the three buckets. Because those objectives are tightly integrated. They work together. They need the flexibility. And when virtually all of the money is going to enforcement, and it shouldn't be enforcement, it should be compliance, that's going to make a lot better plays. And that just said, Treasury's job and Congress's job, hold them accountable. That's fair. Now, enforcement compliance, back to press Reagan, I'll try to go faster, my apologies. I'll come real fast now. Traditionally, tax disputes are resolved during audits, IRS appeals, litigation. When there are disagreements between the IRS and taxpayers, how the hell do you get through it? Those are the three ways. During the Reagan administration, we went to global resolutions. If you have thousands of taxpayers tied up in the same issue, you really want to go litigate every one of them? No, you find a way to fix it, get the money in the bank, redeploy your assets, and go fix something else. That's what we did. You have industry issue resolutions where industries resolve issues, the Treasury and the IRS. You have something called no code sections. Those are advanced pricing agreements, the IRS, taxpayer, the IRS, taxpayer, multiple, or agreements with multiple countries. APMA defends U.S. companies when non-U.S. countries are trying to grab their money. Because of DOGE, we stopped. Here's the fact. There are 125, $250 billion of open cases, taxes plus interest plus penalties. The taxpayers owe money on it almost all the time for sure. Do they all love it? No. And what happened during the Biden administration for a number of reasons, and then what happened during the early days of DOGE, those approaches were dropped. There is a way to raise $60 to $80 billion if they just get back to resolving cases. Ironically, the exam understands that that's what has to happen. There are a lot of folks that say, no, let's litigate.
We'll take this in one more minute to wrap up.
Yes, sir, okay.
I've got three other people, I don't want to.
I'm moving to my favorite, EITC, CTC.
Getting you. I knew you wanted to get to that.
Richard Nixon, Donald Rumsfeld, Senator Moynihan, and Milton Friedman started that ball rolling. That's how it started. It's been evolving year after year. As you pointed out, the advanced child tax credit, 50% of poverty reduced. Policy doesn't happen overnight, magic wand. It evolves over time. Keep pushing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to see if we can get the three of you between now and quarter after. I apologize for that. I really urge, everybody needs to read every word of this. I want all of you to know, I'm sending your testimony to Mr. Joyce, who chairs my committee, but we did not have any IRS witnesses. I want him to read this as well. Commissioner Werfel?
Yeah, Ranking Member Hoyer, Ranking Member DeLauro, Neal, and Thompson, and other members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I had the honor of serving as the 50th Commissioner of the IRS. Early in my tenure, I came to learn that nothing gets done for taxpayers by the Commissioner's office acting on its own. All success hinges on an empowered workforce. I witnessed firsthand the integrity, professionalism, and dedication of the civil servants who carry out the essential and often underappreciated mission of the IRS. Also, early in my tenure, I came to understand that in many places, the IRS operates in a sense as an assembly line. Coming into the organization on that production line are forms, correspondences, remittances, and taxpayers who need support from the IRS by either logging in, dialing in, or walking into an assistance center. Leaving the organization on that production line are refunds, credits, correspondences, collection notices, and audits. When the assembly line falters, it causes delays, backlogs, mistakes, and ultimately more stress for taxpayers and more leakage in the government's financial bottom line. This was the precise situation early in 2023 as COVID was ending and I was coming on board as commissioner. At that point, after a decade plus of budget cuts and pandemic-related disruptions, the filing season in 2022 saw record lows in customer service on the phones and in walk-in centers, record highs in paper backlogs, anemic audit rates at every level, and stagnant technology both in the back office and on the IRS website. Our first priority was to get the assembly line moving fluidly again. We did not at that moment believe there was a turnkey technology that could easily or simply address the problems on the assembly line. Our approach, as noted throughout the 200-plus page strategic operating plan that we published soon after I arrived, was to develop and scale new technology solutions to automate priority parts of the assembly line. We also initiated an immediate hiring surge to get people on the operational front lines to get things running smoothly in areas where the technology was not ready for go live. Funds made available under the Inflation Reduction Act made this effort possible. Without these funds, there was no clear path to get the people needed to get the assembly line running again, and or to automate the line over the short, middle, and longer term. At the point of the presidential transition this past January, we had excellent momentum on these efforts. The hiring surge helped return customer service metrics to historic highs, eliminate most of the paper backlog, and add more fairness by restoring audit rates for higher wealth categories and more complex tax returns. At the same time, we planned, initiated, and launched new technology solutions like expanded document upload options, AI in the call center, enhanced features on the individual taxpayer and business online accounts, and even a new free online filing product. Today, the administration's vision, if I understand it correctly, is to significantly accelerate IRS automation to allow immediate and steep reductions in the workforce while ensuring IRS performance does not slip. I certainly support the desire to deploy technology improvements at the earliest release date. In fact, our previous vision and the one espoused by the administration today share a common theme of a tech-enabled IRS to unlock performance and better serve taxpayers. However, there are two important and fundamental differences between the approaches: the planned pace of change and the status of the workforce. While I was commissioner, our approach had no immediate plans to downsize the workforce, and it allowed the annual release of new automated solutions to accumulate and take hold before staffing reductions would be considered. The current administration's plan is much different by starting with significant staff cuts while intending to, quote, substantially complete most key IT modernization initiatives in the next 2 years. This raises several key questions, including how will the IRS safely and effectively deploy its entire modernization platform in 2 years? The skinny budget released by the administration does not fully answer this question and raises several important other ones. Most notably, how will the IRS proceed on a modernization path with proposed steep cuts in the budget overall and in the technology resources specifically? With an operation as complex as the IRS, there are many additional high-stakes questions that should be posed once a more complete budget justification and strategic plan are released. I've included a sampling of these questions in my written statement. As a new commissioner is now on board, and the new administration nears the halfway mark on its first year in office, I hope that we will soon see additional details on the vision and plan for the IRS that allows for a public dialogue on these questions and many others. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, thank you very much. Dr. Sarin?
Thank you, members Boyer, Neal, DeLauro, Thompson, and members of the committee. Exactly.
The chair wants to make it known that Dr. Sarin teaches at Yale, although she got 2 degrees from Harvard as well, so she's well situated. Doctor?
Thank you so much for inviting me to share my views about the importance of adequately funding the IRS, and perhaps more importantly at this moment, the dangers of dramatically underfunding the IRS to taxpayer service, to our nation's financial security, and to our democracy. Some in this administration have argued that moving toward fiscal sustainability can be accomplished memo calls for a reduction in the IRS's annual appropriations of around 20% and a rescission of the funding provided by the Inflation Reduction Act to help the agency modernize reflects this view. Nothing could be further from the truth. While it is true that a smaller IRS will have a lower staff count to support, those savings pale in comparison to the losses to the FISC in the form of taxes that would have been collected by a well-functioning IRS, but now will not be by an anemic one. As the Treasury Inspector General has previously noted, every hour spent auditing a high-income taxpayer generates $4,500. That is extraordinarily high return work. So gutting the IRS moves us further away from fiscal sustainability, not toward it. How far? In work with my colleagues at the Budget Lab at Yale that I run, we have tried to scope out the likely revenue consequences associated with defunding the IRS. We conclude that the country will lose out on hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of the next decade, potentially more than $2 trillion, as a result of the choices that have been made over the course of the last few months. Those losses could very well be significantly higher when we account for how taxpayer behavior is likely to shift in response to an IRS that further lacks the capacity to enforce the laws on the books. Already, the IRS has lost over 30% of its revenue agents, putting a workforce that is on the field at lower levels than at any time since World War II. If you combine the deficit increasing impact of the proposed reconciliation package with the deficit increasing impact of eroding the IRS, by 2035, debt to GDP ratios could rise to 140. The choice to defund the IRS alone could raise debt to GDP ratios by more than 5 percentage points. There is a perversity that we've all noted about this historic underinvestment in the IRS. As the agency evolves toward its future state, it absolutely should be able to shift towards a leaner workforce where more can be automated with the aid of new artificial intelligence tools. But it is not possible at all, to get to that future state by gutting the IRS workforce, giving the agency more to do, and hoping that without resources, it will find ways to continue to do more with less. Treasury Secretary Bassett recently stated that this filing season was a success, and that it was one that was achieved while reducing $2 billion in waste and planned spending at the IRS. Respectfully, he is mistakenly short-sighted. What is happening at the IRS is what has happened time and time again when an under-resourced agency has been forced to find ways to continue to operate. It is robbing Peter to pay Paul, scaling back its ambitions to modernize technology in order to be able to continue processing this filing season's returns, closing audits it no longer has the resources to support that otherwise would have generated revenue, and prioritizing metrics like phone service while closing hundreds of taxpayer assistance centers and failing to help more constituents get the child tax credits that they're entitled to that will lift their children out of poverty. A well-functioning IRS is a critical component of democracy. That might sound hyperbolic, but I really think it is not. The IRS collects 96% of the revenue that funds our government, our schools, our healthcare, our national security, and our critical infrastructure. The tax system relies on voluntary compliance to support essentially everything government provides its citizens. And ours is a massively successful system. But invariably, as we continue to push that system to the brink, it will break. Indeed, it may already be breaking. It is far too soon to precisely be able to scope out what the implications of gutting the IRS are likely to be on taxpayers and on our nation's finances. But we know that they will be significant, and the choice to hamstring the IRS is a colossal unforced error. It is not glamorous to work at the IRS. The agency is not going to win any popularity contests, as few enjoy making good on their tax obligations each year. But the IRS interacts with every household and every business every year. And its dedicated civil servants that I was so privileged to have the opportunity to work with take that responsibility immensely seriously. Its workforce certainly must evolve, but it should not indiscriminately be ransacked. And I hope that the testimony today from a bipartisan group of tax experts across the ideological spectrum who all share that view can help to encourage course correction. If the IRS is not significantly funded, adequately funded, we will be leaving a lot of revenue on the table. But perhaps more importantly, we'll be eroding trust in government. And that is critical to our nation's function. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for that excellent statement. Again, I would call everybody's attention that really cares about this, to read the testimony of all of these witnesses. It's much more extensive. They raise their highlights. Ms. Olson?
Thank you, ranking members Neal, Hoyer, Deloro, Thompson, and members of the committees. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the impact on the IRS funding cuts. This is my 50th year working in tax, 18 of which I serve as the National Taxpayer Advocate. One thing I have learned in that time is that if taxpayers do not trust that the IRS will provide the assistance and information they need to meet their obligations, or it will listen to their concerns when they believe the agency is wrong, or it will ensure that others are paying what is required under the law, voluntary compliance will erode. Without trust, the IRS will be forced to expend more costly enforcement resources to achieve the same level of compliance it has now. Thus, increasing taxpayer trust is both efficient and cost-effective. Digitalization of tax administration has been held out as a reason for reducing human resources, but digitalization can both increase and erode trust. For example, use of artificial intelligence can improve audit selection, but AI and other automation must be coupled with, 1, robust and ongoing oversight, 2, training of employees such that they are knowledgeable in applying the underlying tax law and are able to properly apply the output of the machine learning in human decision making, and 3, dispute resolution mechanisms so taxpayers can challenge the decisions made by humans using AI and automation. All of this requires significant investment in human resources, a skilled and educated workforce, and a robust governance structure. This digitalization also requires 2 additional taxpayer rights: the right to transparency regarding when and how AI is used, and the right to human intervention, not just a human in the loop, but the right to deal with a human being when a taxpayer's property, health, and welfare are impacted by IRS action or inaction. Realizing these rights requires an investment in the agency and its workforce. Confidentiality of return information is an essential driver of taxpayer trust. Congress has created exceptions to the confidentiality of tax returns and return information only after carefully weighing the compelling need for such exceptions and the potential damage to taxpayer trust. And since 1976, the IRS has by and large diligently guarded tax return information, narrowly interpreting and carefully reviewing such requests for sharing data. But earlier this year, all that changed with an unprecedented agreement to share tax return information with the Department of Homeland Security and with pronouncements to build an API platform to share IRS data with other government agencies. The erosion of confidentiality will undermine both tax compliance and taxpayer trust. IRS funding decreases and staffing reductions harm taxpayers and erode taxpayer trust. Yet this administration has proposed that taxpayer services spending for fiscal year 2026 be reduced by 7% from 2025 levels. Enforcement spending decreased by 45% and technology operations support by 58% for an overall decrease of 44%. The House and Senate have followed suit with their appropriation proposal. We will see this impact sooner, notwithstanding the administration's announcement of a successful 2025 filing season. The filing season does not end on April 15th. There are hundreds of thousands of returns not yet filed. There are thousands of returns with frozen refunds that require someone to look at taxpayer documentation. There are thousands of returns frozen for identity theft that have been languishing for years without any resolution in sight. And there are thousands of amended returns that are coming in over the summer for which there are fewer trained employees to process, review, and resolve. Indeed, TICTA has flagged the issue of taxpayer service hiring and its impact on future filing seasons, concluding the deferred retirements, hiring freezes, termination of probationary employees, and announced reductions in force, quote, will have significant impact on IRS operations, end quote. Budget cuts will also erode the fundamental taxpayer right to seek and receive taxpayer advocate service assistance, which is a safety valve for taxpayers. Currently, TAS is assigning new cases within about 30 days of receipts, a far cry from the 1 to 7 days when I was the MTA. If TAS is that far behind in getting cases assigned, taxpayers will likely suffer irreversible and significant harm. This is an unconscionable state of affairs and will only get worse in the coming year, as TAS reported it's a 25% staffing decrease because of the deferred retirements. Thank you, and I look forward to your.
Thank you very much. I also want to say for the record that I had extensive conversations with Mr. Reddick and Mr. Russotti, who have made statements, and we will have them available as well. I want to thank the witnesses. Excellent testimony, very helpful. And I now want to recognize the ex-chairman of the subcommittee in the IRS on IRS, Ways and Means, Tax Committee, Mike Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. Thank you all for your excellent testimony. I've got a couple of questions, and any one of you, I think, can answer them, but maybe we'll go with Mr. Werfel first. And the pre-certification program for taxpayers for the earned income tax credit. Now, IRS has tried that or something similar in the past. Can you draw on that past experience and what we might look forward to if this is put in place?
Yeah, there's a significant concern with a pre-certification program that could potentially disincentivize or create a situation in which individuals that are truly eligible are not getting the earned income tax credit. I think it's noble to try to attack the improper payments in the earned income tax credit. And one of the primary reasons why there are improper payments in the ITC is because the IRS lacks detailed information on childhood residency. And that's one of the key causes, because under the law, you have to live with your dependent child that you're claiming for 6 months or more. There is no national childhood residency database. There's no way to validate this. And so for decades, the IRS has explored different approaches for how to get better information on whether the child being claimed is truly eligible. In testing out those approaches, they have not yet found one that balances the need to make sure that eligible people are not kicked off of this program, this very important program. In looking at the language that is in the latest tax bill, it takes a program that had been previously piloted and had a lot of issues and scales it and expands it in a way that will require the IRS to review pre-certifications of over 10 million children at a time when their resources are being cut. I think Dr. Sarin effectively pointed out that we're not just cutting the IRS budget and keeping everything else equal. We're cutting the IRS budget and adding new requirements in the new tax bill. And one of them will be to review over 10 million new pre-certs to make sure that these individuals get the earned income tax credit. I think it's interesting, so being that last point, that my understanding is that when CBO takes a look at that provision, they see it as a saver, but not just because it will reduce improper payments. They see it as a saver because it will also mean that eligible people won't get the benefit because of the paperwork and the requirements, and there'll be less outlays. And that is not good program integrity. That creates both overpayments and underpayments, and improper payments should be looking at both.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Collins. Your predecessor just came out minutes ago and said that staffing is down 26%, which that's a significant amount to cut staffing any place. So it's going to affect the performance of the IRS, but it's also going to, I would guess, hurt staff morale for those who are left. Could you just briefly talk next? I have one more question I'd like to get answered.
Yeah, I think that the fact that you're not able to do the work that you care deeply about, that the frustration of seeing things, not being able to get the information you need to help taxpayers, not being able to work in a timely manner when you know you're getting a case that needs urgent attention. All of this erodes taxpayer trust, and a discussion of employees as if they are part of fraud, waste, and abuse is just a demeaning thing, which will be reflected in their interactions with taxpayers. If I may add to Commissioner Werfel's statements about the pre-cert, I was on the executive steering committee that proposed the pre-cert initiative that we did in 2024 and 2025. It was a test to learn whether it would create administrative burdens for eligible taxpayers to receive the benefits as we were trying to deter people who were not eligible. And what the test showed was precisely that the pre-certification did create those administrative burdens, and we concluded that it was not something we should implement. So you already had a test that proved exactly why you shouldn't do this.
Thank you. And then Dr. Sarin, with these cuts, there's going to have to be some decisions made, and they're going to have to prioritize what the IRS does. In your study of this and knowledge of this, how does that fall out? Do they? Is it going to be concentrated on all the high-end earners, or is it going to fall to regular working men and women, middle class, lower class,
So
lower income?
I think two sets of things are going to happen, and both are quite consequential. One is that if you look at the IRS's work in the enforcement arena, what happened in the decade leading up to the Inflation Reduction Act was that its capacity to do high-end enforcement, as Ranking Member Hoyer described, was basically eliminated. Millionaire audits went down by something like 80%. Large corporate audits went down by 50%. Partnership audit rates were basically zero. And that is, in those areas of significant need, is exactly where the IRS under Commissioner Werfel had started to build up. So they had started to do new hiring and recruit immensely talented people to do that work. What has happened in the last 6 months is A, a lot of those people have left the agency, so the capacity to do that work has been significantly diminished. And B, as you look forward over the course of the next few years, this is incredibly high resource intensive work. It can be aided by technology, but we need to develop that technology, and right now in meaningful ways the IRS is running on a 1960s technological infrastructure. And so what is going to happen is they are not going to be able to do that work. And in reality, the work on the low and middle end of the income spectrum involves what is much less resource intensive. It is sending out letters to taxpayers. And so what I worry about is they're going to scale back on high-end enforcement efforts. The capacity to scale, or the need to scale back on the low and middle income is going to be much less significant because that's much less resource intensive. But what is also going to happen, and this discussion about pre-certs is so important in that vein, is that if you think about taxpayer service and the capacity to answer the phones when you have questions, that number used to be under 20% at the beginning of the Biden administration as a result of the investments of the Inflation Reduction Act. Under Commissioner Werfel, it got up to over 90%. And so last resource IRS next filing season is going to be able for low and middle income taxpayers to answer the phones less. It is going to be able to help people less get the credits that they're entitled to. And so you're kind of hurting those people on both ends of the spectrum. You're both not doing the enforcement against the high income people who are disproportionately responsible for the tax gap, and you're not answering their questions and helping them get access to all that they're entitled to.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Correll. You're back.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Going back to the pre-cert, two comments. One, the AI scheme says it is 17 million families.
Commissioner, you're a little hard to hear when you look at Mr. Werfel.
I keep looking for him for help.
Right.
But it's a big number, but the key thing, it's easy to fix. Because the IRS is capable of identifying risks, and putting that responsibility on the Secretary of the Treasury. So you're not only chasing kids, and you're not making 17 million families file. You can start with 50,000 families, and let the Secretary say, well, there's a mess over here, I'm going up to 200. Or maybe they say, the mess over here is these 30 real bad actors who are promoting Schedule C strategies. It is so fixable.
Let me, I can't resist an opportunity to talk for just a minute about the EITC. It was Ronald Reagan's favorite poverty program, it's everybody's favorite poverty program. If you read the statute, which I made a mistake one day of doing, trying to figure out how to deal with this, it's basically impossible to understand, because it was designed to make sure that the people who had the child for 6 months got the payment, ignoring the fact that these are lower income families. A lot of times they're single parents working, or single parent families, or grandparents, or uncles and aunts to take care of these kids. And so sorting through a much more complicated family situation to figure who had the kid for 6 months as opposed to 3 and only had them for the summer is where a lot of the complexity came out. And we decide that people decide whether they're married or not for income tax purposes by who's married on December 31st. My suggestion has been, nobody seems yet to update enough, we ought to decide who has the child on December 31st. Because a lot of the confusion is grandmother has the child all summer, uncle has the child after school, and they mistakenly assume therefore, and their preparer says, well, you had the child. So you sometimes get 2 or 3 people in good faith thinking they're eligible because they had the child for some significant portion of time. If we're going to spend a lot of time in this, which we ought to because it does encourage people to work and it's a program everybody supports, we need to simplify the program. All of this stuff around the outside does not deal with the complexity built into the statute in the context of very complicated situations. So my suggestion all along has been, find out who has the child on December 31st, pay them, and let the family decide whether the grandmother deserves some payment for having the child for 2 months in the summer and whoever is watching the child after school.
If I may add some.
Could I just, John, follow up on that? So a lot of the problem is faulty preparation.
Unregulated tax returns, correct?
Yeah.
We fixed that problem in the American Family Act with who had the kids. We followed the kids. It was the money follows the child. We worked that out in the child tax credit effort. It would seem to me that this is fixable. You know, we have a social security system that nobody thought at the outset, because everybody had the same names, we're going to be able to make it. And would we now say that Social Security doesn't make it? Absolutely, it's bedrock. And the issue is on these programs, whether it is the EITC or the child tax credit, which we're going to get reinstated, that these problems can be worked out if there is the will to work them out. And that's a political will to work them out. We've got the know-how to be able to do it. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
What I've always said is, we ought not be trying to figure out by statute who had the child. We ought to let the family figure out who should get the payment. Just figure out who's got the child and then let the family work it out.
Amen.
One thing I'd like to note, and I've recommended this since about 2010, is that the IRS changed its mission statement to recognize that in fact it has 2 lines of business. It not only collects revenue, but it disperses social benefits. And by recognizing those 2 lines of business, you're actually hiring different employees to deal with the family credits, to help people deal with the administrative burden, to understand the family structures. And so I think that's a very key thing that could be, both done administratively, but also Congress could tell the IRS that we want your mission statement to be designed in that way. The other thing I say is that there's a legislative need to define family in the code beyond the 1960s nuclear family. You are leaving out whole populations, and then it becomes difficult, when you're trying to say this child is this person's, you're not going to fit it into the existing definition, even though you know the child lives there, you know the child exist, that someone's taking care of that child, but they don't fit that definition.
One more important point. In order to avoid 17 million forms going to the IRS and a lot of eligible people being kicked off, Commissioner Goldberg and I put together language that embraces this risk-based approach, where you start with the higher risk applicants and pre-certify them, and we share that with the Senate Finance Committee. So to the extent you can follow up with them, I think that threads the needle in terms of addressing improper payments, but not overburdening the IRS at the wrong time with 17 million new forms.
This is why I wanted to have both the Ways and Means and the appropriators together, because it's not one or the other, it's working together. And Mr. Neal and I and Mr. Thompson and I and the chair are very close friends, and we work together, but this is, it was important to do it this way too. This is incredible.
Information is dynamite, thank you.
This also wants to say to you as well, and say to all of you, what the IRS did during the pandemic was nothing short of extraordinary. And every American ought to know it. Every American family who got some money, every small businessman who got some money, it was due to IRS's capability. And that's what information needs to be used for. Not, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Not sharing it with those kids. Mr. Bishop?
Thank you very much. Let me thank all of you for being here. I've really enjoyed the time I've been to spend with Ms. Olson back during your tenure as the taxpayer advocate. I believe that office was extremely helpful for America's taxpayers. I've got three areas I'd just like for all of you to touch on briefly. Obviously, the impact of funding and staffing reductions have impacted the modernization effort at the IRS. If you could just talk about that, the ways that the budget and staffing constraints impacted your ability to modernize. Secondly, dealing with continuing resolutions. The Chairman Hoyer indicated during the pandemic, you did such a great job. But during the pandemic, my low income and older constituents who filed paper tax returns had to wait years for their refunds. And of course, with the IRA, we appropriated $80 billion in mandatory money for modernization and improved service to taxpayers. But the investment very much needed, but at this point, $40 billion, or half of that funding, has been rescinded in the last two appropriations bills. The first $20 billion was part of an agreement in the Fiscal Responsibility Act negotiated between Speaker McCarthy and President Biden, and the second $20 billion was the outcome of a default in the year-long CR. So if appropriations go into a third year of a CR, we'll see another $20 billion of investment in the IRA lost to a mindless process. So how important was that $80 billion in the first place, and what does it mean if we lose another $20 billion for the third CR?
Go ahead, Dan. I'll get started. Look, when you sit down at the IRS, first of all, let me comment that the work done by the IRS during the pandemic, credit goes to Commissioner Reddick, and if Commissioner Reddick was here, he would immediately turn and give credit to the civil servants at the IRS. Look, when you sit in the commissioner's chair or involved in the IRS taxpayer advocate, you realize that there are two big gaps. There's a service gap that persists. That means that as much as we make progress with our taxpayers that wait on the phone for 2 hours to get hung up on, or they show up to a walk-in center and find a line around the block and never get in to get their problem answered. Even as the ex-commissioner, I still hear from taxpayers who think I'm still the commissioner, find me, find my phone number, my email, and I hear these heartbreaking stories of lack of access. And so there's more work to be done. And the story I often tell is that on April 13th, 2024, so 2 days, it was a Saturday, we opened 70 taxpayer assistance centers around the country just to do the right thing. We had the money under the Inflation Reduction Act for any last minute tax issues that you wanted to come talk to us about before the April 15th deadline. a taxpayer assistance center, when it's operating at full capacity, can serve about 300 people a day. In many locations, we have 1,500 people online by 5 a.m. And that's, so what that reflects to you is that the tax system in the country is bigger than what the IRS can handle. We're sending away 1,200 people hours before we're even open. That's not about incompetence. That's about the reality. And a lot of those people don't have access to the technology or not kind of digitally savvy or to be able to figure it out. Over time, the nation will become more digitally savvy, but you can't shut these things down immediately. But to get to your question, the approach that we laid out was function by function, increasing digital solutions for taxpayers so that they didn't have to call and they didn't have to come into walk-in centers, and we were making progress. But if you pull back the funding on that, two things happen. One, you're not making the same pace in terms of digitizing these solutions. I want to see the plan from the IRS and the Treasury Department, because I don't know how to formulate in my own head this technology modernization in 2 years when the funding is being cut. If it's possible, great, I'll be the first to cheer it. I just want to see and kick the tires on the plan to understand what the critical path is. But also, if you're cutting staff at the same time, that means not only slowing the pace of these digital solutions, you're also meaning that for those where you have to call in, walk in, and use paper, you're creating more headaches and more stress around it. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. But I hold hope. Commissioner Goldberg is trying to teach me to be more optimistic, and I'm trying to listen to him. That if we could see a plan, I mentioned in my statement, shortly after I started, there was a 200-page plan that we issued on what we're doing. The criticism we got on the plan was that it wasn't detailed enough. That it didn't give as prescriptive information exactly how we were going to modernize. And I love that feedback. I was like, 200-page plan isn't specific enough? All right, let's go out a few more decimal points. We need to see a plan, I think, from the IRS to understand what the direction is.
Can I make one point about the pandemic that I think is very relevant at this moment? It was remarkable that the IRS managed to cut checks to more than 80% of American households and figure out how to advance a monthly child tax credit that lifted millions out of poverty. It was remarkable work. It is actually a mistake to think that that type of work didn't come without real ramifications for what else the agency was able to do. Because remember, when we asked the IRS to modernize, we're asking them essentially to build a new plane while they continue flying their existing plane. And so what happened, as you pointed out, Congressman Bishop, was with respect to paper returns that are largely manually transcribed, like literally people circling line items on the return and then typing it into IRS data systems, that work was delayed by months and even years. And there were real consequences to your constituents who did not get their refunds. And so what I'm worried about now is kind of a version of the same is happening, right? Because we're doing even worse by way of the IRS than we had during the pandemic, when they had already been underfunded for a decade. And now we're saying, figure out how to do this pre-cert for millions of families, and also figure out how to navigate very complicated new code provisions relating to things like no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. And we can debate the merits of those particular policy proposals, but I think what you can't debate is those are administratively really complicated challenges for an agency that you're now essentially placing back in the Stone Ages. And so I'm just really worried about what the consequences of all of this are going to be. And I think that they are likely already quite significant, but certainly going to grow to be more significant over the course of the next many years. And another piece on modernization, like, it really doesn't have to be this way in some sense. Commissioner Werfel is sort of not taking enough credit for what is a really remarkable framework that was laid. And it's not just his framework. The fact that the IRS knew that it needed to modernize its antiquated technological systems, the fact that the IRS wants to move in the direction of something called paperless processing, which is essentially the idea that there shouldn't necessarily have to be paper at the IRS and manual transcribers. All of this was well understood and has been well understood for years and years and decades by the talented civil servants of the IRS. The challenge has always been resources. And the challenge has been the security of multi-year funding, because a lot of this isn't a one-year thing. It takes many years to try and modernize some of these systems, and knowing that you have the funding in place to be able to support staffing not just tomorrow, but a year from now or 2 years from now, is how you recruit talent. And so all of this is to say I'm pretty concerned about the direction that we're going, but I think, again, maybe I'll do Commissioner Goldberg's optimism. It doesn't really have to be this way because this isn't a partisan issue. Every president since Reagan has encouraged more funding to the IRS, including President Trump in his first term, and including Commissioner Reddick in his first IRS.
Thank you, Senator. Let me just, this chart points out what you just said. I mean, all of you said. Here are the number of returns. Here's the flat funding. But here's the actual funding. The purchasing power for IRS has gone into the basement, while the demand has gone into the attic. It doesn't work. We're gonna fix that. I want to get to, Mr. Neal wants to ask a
Yeah,
question.
I do. I'll just ask a question, we're going to go to Mr. Swazi right after that. Compliance ratios during your time. Compliance ratios during your time, have they changed substantially? What percentage of the American people voluntarily pay their taxes on a tax deliberation?
About 85% are voluntarily compliant, though for certain income streams, compliance rates are under 50%. And that's stuff like proprietorship income or rental income, importantly disproportionately earned by the very top. So the top 1% is responsible for around 30% of rental taxes.
And that can be laid out and defined so that it's a reality, and we can make that point over and over again, because it falls on deaf ears and it's poo-poo. Anyway, Mr. Swazi.
Compliance is an interesting concept. As I said a little earlier, yes, I comply every week, or every month in my case. Somebody takes it out of my pay. It's not like I said, well, go take it, withhold it. So yes, it's voluntary, but it's a system. And the reason we have such a tax cap is we don't take the money out for those folks who have substantial obligations, but who we don't take at the beginning. They've got to voluntarily report it, or we have to have auditors. Tom Swazi from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer, for bringing us together like this. Thank you to all the witnesses. Thanks for the time. Thanks for all your service. Mr. Commissioner Werfel, I want to dig in on what you've already said. You know, the administration is selling a very attractive message. They say we're going to reduce the size of the workforce, we're going to replace it with technology, and we're going to collect as much money that way by doing that. Less people, 25% reduction now, going down to 40% reduction. It's going to save billions of dollars over time, and we're going to replace that with technology, and things are going to get better. Now, you've said that, yeah, that may sound like a good idea, but you need to have a plan, and you need to have the people to implement the new technology. And so by not having the people, we may not be able to implement the technology on time. So the IRS said that this past tax season, they did fine. They did a great job. They had a pretty smooth season. When do you think the problems of this workforce reduction, not about service, but I'm talking about as far as collection, when is this going to start to manifest itself?
Yeah, I would say that, as Mr. Olson pointed out, tax funds goes past April 15th. I think that we are going to start to see degradation in services. There's already degradation in direct revenue. It just takes a while to report. It's what I call a lagging indicator. It takes the tax gap assessment, unfortunately, because it's so complicated, is years in arrears in terms of when you assess it. So we already know, just based on the math of it, that there's less audit resources, less revenue coming in. In terms of taxpayer service, The filing season that they had, I think, was built off momentum from the previous investments that were being made. But with the reduction in staff, the turnover in leadership, I'm very worried about next filing season.
Okay, so I don't want you to disclose any whistleblowers or anything like that, but can you tell me, you must still talk to employees who work at the IRS, what are they saying to you? What were the projects, the information technology projects you were working on, and how are they going now? What are you hearing from people?
If I may interject here, is that on the end of February, on a Friday night that's now known internally as the Friday Night Massacre, 50 information technology senior executives and senior leadership were placed on administrative leave by email at the end of the day. So as we talk about the IRS moving forward with technological projects and, creating this brave new world, there is no senior leadership with the knowledge of those projects that we're starting. They're not in existence today.
So what are you hearing, Commissioner, from people that used to work there, and what projects are they working on that they're not working on now?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that there's not a lot of information being shared. I think there's some concerns about speaking publicly. I would say that the first thing I hear is morale is low. I hear that there's a big loss of talent, especially in the technology space. I hear that there are big ideas around AI, but as I mentioned before, not yet a lot of details in terms of how you're going to structure those projects and with what resources to get across the finish line.
So as you were saying earlier, one of the things that we should really be trying to get them to give us is just tell us what's your plan.
Exactly.
How are you going to implement this technology? Who's going to implement this technology? What type of technology you're going to do? And how are you going to do it without the proper people there?
And that's the bottom line in my testimony and my statement is we should cheer a more tech-enabled IRS. We should recognize that the IRS has underperformed for too long, and I welcome a vision for change, absolutely.
Is there anything that you're hearing from people that say, hey, they're doing these exciting things, they're implementing this new thing, it's coming down the corner? Mr. Goldberg, are you hearing that?
Yes, sir.
So what are you hearing?
One approach is we're going to sit in the audience, cross our arms, and scowl, say, approve your plan. Another approach is open up our arms. We get it, we actually have the same objective, just like we have the same commitment to families and kids, we don't articulate it the same way. I think you all should hold hands over each other and get all this shit done this year. Do it. But I know it's not going to happen.
Okay, but that's not, we can't hold hands if they're not going to let us know what's going
I'll
on.
give you a very specific example. There is a company that is using AI to identify non-compliance at the highest end of the income business range, who is currently working with the IRS.
So Ms. Delora is asking, is that
Is that
Palantir?
Palantir?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, no.
Okay, because Palantir is working as well. And Mr. Miller has a very significant investment in Palantir.
Ms. Olson, can you?
Well, I just, one project that was started under the Inflation Reduction Act, which was, and Palantir had this contract, which was to provide customer service reps with a 360 view of taxpayer information. So when a taxpayer called, instead of saying, I can't see what the information is, let me send a note and maybe you'll hear back or get a letter or something, they could deal with things in real time. That contract, all task orders under that contract have been stopped, zeroed out, and that contract has been used to do the API for sharing information all over. So instead of proceeding with something that would have had immediate impact and maybe reducing the need for downstream work and saving resources in that way by customer service reps being able to help people in real time, that's stopped. So what's the plan for replacing that?
Let me say, my view, as a member of the appropriations committee for a very long period of time, that should have triggered oversight. I won't call it investigation, oversight. What's happening here? And one of the reasons we're doing this today We have not had a single IRS, secretary testified before, on the Financial Service Committee. No IRS official. Of course, a lot of them are gone.
No, it's been.
The chief procurement officer has gone on retirement. The person who's over procurement is not a senior executive. Not even internally to the IRS is there someone doing oversight for procurement.
I want to get the plan too. Will you finish?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ivy and then Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I was going to say Mr. Chair, but all in due time. I want to thank the panel. I appreciate you all coming in today. I've only been in Congress in my third year, but it looks to me like what happened was we put this proposal together to increase the resources that were going to be available to the IRS. The Republicans beat the hell out of us over the head with it because they said the new auditors that would be brought in would target working class people, and we're going to take money away from folks that were already overburdened with taxes, as opposed to there being a focus on large corporations, high income people. Is there a structural way to respond to that? In other words, is there a unit or something at the IRS where the resources were going to go to those people and those it used to be called the Public Integrity Unit, Department of Justice, but they got rid of that already too. But is there something like that we can use to explain to the public? We're going to add these people, they're going to go after these high income sources, it'll generate additional revenue, and they're not going to focus on you. And the way you know that is because it's going to go to this particular unit. I see two nodding heads. Dr. Sarin?
So in fact, we did try to do a version of that in the Inflation Reduction, in that there was very specific language that Congress authored legislation which said that these additional dollars of funding that we're giving the IRS, we really want to focus on this problem that we discussed. So not a single one of those dollars is going to go towards enforcement activities of people making under $400,000 a year. And I actually think this is a commitment that we can then, now it's been a few years, naturally go back and kind of start to look at the data. And there's been recent press reporting about the fact that although there's been a very significant uptick in audit rates of high-income individuals or corporations and starting to be in partnership as well, you haven't seen that uptick for people under $400,000 a year. And the priority, very much so, was exactly starting off and sort of investing in things like high net worth teams, partnership structures, and the type of work that is very distinct from let's do more correspondence audits of low and middle income people. I think a sort of challenge for all of us as we go forward here is and this is not new to the IRS or new to all of you who have lived this for many decades, the sort of politicization of the IRS and the ways in which I watched it when I was at the Treasury Department in the aftermath of the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, conversations about armed IRS agents going to be at Walmart and those sorts of sort of fear-mongering around the agency's work were both destructive to the efforts of the IRS and the dedicated civil servants and were responsible for so much. They're among the largest administrators of federal benefits in addition to being the tax administrator, but also ultimately were very destructive to what I hope would be permanence with respect to these investments and the capacity to have multi-year security. So I hope you all, as you are going to be able to come up with a salve for what I think is a real problem, which is even when you do the right thing by way of trying to construct these funds such that you try to focus them on the largest area of problem, which is highly complicated taxpayers who are responsible for a disproportionate share of the tax gap, you end up running into some of these messages.
I think I saw Ms. Olson nodding and then Commissioner Werfel.
I think the multi-year funding for these kinds of projects is absolutely vital. And that was part of what the Inflation Reduction Act gave. And watching it being pulled away, what we were watching was important improvements being stopped. I was reading through past TIGA reports about modernization. And there was a quote in there about something that, if the IRS is able to complete this project on time, this will be transformational. And I thought, I've never read an Inspector General report that has ever complimented the agency and said it would do something transformational. And all of that has stopped. And so when you talk about fraud, waste, and abuse, you have to ask what kind of waste are we having going on when investments have been made in projects that could have been transformational, and now are stopped because we're going to do something better, that we don't know what it is, and you don't have multi-year funding to do it, and IT and operation support has been cut by 58% from 2025 to 2026. Where's the plan for that? How are they going to do all that they're saying that they want to do when they're not using that funding?
Commissioner?
I would just say, Congressman, I got a lesson in public relations when I was at the IRS. My elevator pitch for the Inflation Reduction Act was two things. One, every taxpayer should be able to do every interaction with the IRS digitally or virtually if they choose. And we weren't there yet, so with this money, we're going to make that possible. And the second was we're going to close the tax gap for where it's where the highest wealth and the most complicated taxpayers are paid. That's it. That's the vision. And as I went around the country, actually promoting that elevator speech, I learned two things. One was I couldn't break through from the previous notion that this money, all that 87,000 armed agents that were going to show up at your small business or your demo. Because even though there was no truth to that, I could yell it from the mountaintop. We're not hiring armed agents. It's not going to happen. And even those that are armed with calculators are going to be scrutinizing the wealthy and the complex, not that they were low income. But that didn't break through. One thing that I did learn that I think is important, hasn't come up yet today, is as I met with all kinds of members of the public across the country, the one issue that they wanted the IRS to do more around was the emergence of tax scams and schemes, especially in the information age, and especially exploding during COVID. When everyone went home, the criminals in our country couldn't traffic in as much drugs or traffic in as much people, whatever it is the bad things they do. So they went on the internet and started to develop criminal enterprises, and tax scams became one of them. So one of the key messages, I think, is an underfunded IRS not only won't serve taxpayers effectively on phones and on the internet and walk-in centers, not only will allow complex filers to shift the burden of funding our nation to middle and low income, but it will also create an even more dangerous playground for bad actors to exploit underserved populations through tax scams and schemes.
Let me get to Mr. Steny.
Thank you, and I'm going to be very brief because we've been here a while. But thank you for joining us, and I appreciate everything you said. Commissioner Werfel, your vision, service expectations with the IRS should be at least the standard we expect in our everyday lives. As we go through, whether it's ordering online, going to, whatever we do, we should have at least the same high level. And I would argue from our government, we should have a higher level of service. So I appreciate what you did. The protection from scammers, the protection from those who are seeking to take our money, to do our parents, grandparents, ourselves harm. We should be all that. But the big thing, I remember when one of your colleagues who's not here, Commissioner Reddick, testified that the tax gap was as big as $1 trillion a year. It's a huge number, and over time, it means that the rest of us who are paying our taxes on time and in full are carrying the burden and letting those freeloaders get that free ride. So I just want to ask a quick question. Let me just go across the commissioners. How big do you think the annual tax gap actually is, Commissioner?
Well, it's excuse me. It's catchy. It's catchy. Yeah.
No, I showed when I heard on it too.
Yeah. As Commissioner Werfel said, the IRS very carefully tries to determine that. They do a set of audits every year for 3 years and then look at it. It takes time because some of those audits go to appeal and you have to let them go final. As I said, when I was Commissioner, the estimate was $400 billion a year. It's now up to $600 billion. Trillion is probably a little high, but somewhere in there is a very large number. It represents 2/3 of it probably is not collectible, that's because of bankruptcies or otherwise, but 1/3 of it, $200 billion, represents primarily high-income taxpayers and others who either are not filing at all, a phenomenal number of people don't bother to file, or pushing the envelope on the theory they're not going to get audited.
And just for the sake of that, Commissioner.
Yeah, and I would say, Commissioner Reddick thought it was bigger, but think about it this way. He's looking out at the Pacific Ocean and saying the Pacific Ocean is the tax gap. I was was just looking out of the Atlantic Ocean and saying, I think it's more Atlantic Ocean size, roughly $600 to $700 billion. It's still an ocean. And it's still something that we're not serving taxpayers effectively. So once you get above 100 billion, but now we're way above 500 billion, we have a problem. And the issue is are we going to make the right investments? And going back to Mr. Goldberg, the statements from the current administration around collections and making sure people pay what they owe, it's the right messaging. The question becomes down to what is the plan? And can we be a part of either evaluating the plan or contributing to it? But that's the power of transparency and of GPRA and other things where you publish what you're going to do and how you're going to resources it, and then you can get
Right. And so I will close with this. I know that if I want to close that gap, I need to invest in two things. I need to have the people who can process the returns, look at the returns, see what there's problems. I need to supplement their talent and their expertise with technology. And the better I do the two of those, the better we're going to close the gap. If we close the gap, we don't need to go to the rest of us who are paying our taxes and say you need to pay more. We can close our debt. We can work on reducing our deficits by simply giving the resources necessary for the IRS to do their job. So I just want to say thank you. I apologize. I need to go to my next thing.
Thank you very, very much, and yes, thank you. You know, Steny, I really believe we can't call hearings, but this briefing is very, very powerful. Let me make this statement, and I think you all know this. You are a pawn. I think from the appropriation point of view. The IRS is a pawn in the deliberations as to where we can get to in terms of getting appropriations bills done. I have been in the Four Corners meeting where somebody will say, well, we can agree to this if you will take $10 billion from the IRS. So you have become, you know, this is a fact. And unless we say yes, then we can't get to a bill, government closes, okay? That is the situation that we have in appropriations. And I don't know. I mean, the story, and you are vilifying. The arms, the guns, you're all carrying guns and, you know, going after the small folk. It is, and to turn that Titanic around is very, very tough. One of the questions that I have, which I started with, is I am tired of listening to a spending argument. There is never a conversation about the gap and the revenue side. And for that, to be very honest with you, it is not about my saying it or even Mr. Hoyer saying it. We are not the best messengers of that argument. We need all of you. We need people who are respected in this effort to lay out what that gap is. 600 to 700, 5 to 6, it's extraordinary. It is extraordinary. It's Atlantic, Pacific, whatever it is as deep as the ocean is. But we got to translate that so that the person in New Haven, Connecticut understands that that is the problem, and what we're doing with the IRS is giving them the tools that they need in order to have some equity in this process. Now they feel it deeply. The public feels that they're getting ripped off. But we haven't been able to capture that argument and make it clear and clarify it. And I'm asking for help, really, in helping us to be able to try to get that message out. But it's more than a message. 5 to 600, 6 to 7, 3 to 4. What the hell we could do with those dollars in terms of continuing taking these appropriations bills and stopping mental health services, education services, transportation, housing, and saying we don't have the money to do it, and I'll go to the child tax credit. I am damn tired of listening to say that we can provide all these tax breaks, but we can't afford a child tax credit, the advanced child tax credit. We can, but we don't have the arguments yet, which is why this is such an important hearing, an important briefing. And you need to help us, and you need to identify for us who are the messengers that have the credibility, like yourselves, to make this case for the public. Without it, we're not going to do it, because when I get to the end of this appropriations, we're doing bills without top lines, without budgets, whatever the hell it is here, but we're moving forward. But we're going to get to an end. And it's going to be trade-offs. They're trade-offs. And I'm going to tell you about the trade-offs. Those trade-offs exist in the United States Senate. It's where you can go. Remember the first time we talked about 10 and 10? No, let's do the 20 all at once with the IRS. Second go round, oh God, we got to have $10 billion to take it from the IRS. You know, otherwise we don't have a bill. Help is what I'm asking for. And can I talk about continuing? We have a revenue problem, and I'll just say, you don't have to say this, and not a spending problem. The problem is on the revenue side. We need help in making that determination and being able to stand tall. I'm sorry, it's not meant to make a speech, but I need an answer to that question, because we're going on this reconciliation bill. You know, let me just tell you, we thought we had the votes in the House. We thought we had the votes, 8 or 9 people. They made a trip to the White House. We lost by 2 votes. Okay? You think the United States Senate is going to hold out? Push comes to shove? And it's a July 4th recess? Are they going to hang in? Hell no. And we're going to watch that cave as well, if we're honest with ourselves. That's imminent. And the results of that, and where that is going, is a disaster for this country. We need your help in identifying that.
The problem we have in Congress is.
Fred wants to make a statement. Go ahead, Fred.
The problem we have in Congress is we have this ranking member of the Appropriations Committee who lacks sort of passion and the ability to get up to really confronting problems. We just had somebody who had a little get up and go, we'd be fine. Ted Agnew, and YouTube's great. Ted Agnew and I were elected at the same time, 1966. He was elected as a progressive governor in opposition to a Democrat whose campaign slogan was "Your home is your castle," which is a very fine constitutional principle that the government can't come into your home without probable cause. But he used it against fair housing. So many Democrats voted for him. He came in as a progressive governor. And in his inaugural address, I was sitting on the east front of the lawn in Annapolis as a newly elected state senator. He said a profound sentence: "The cost of failure far exceeds the price of progress." The failure to invest in any business, in collecting the revenues due it, will predict its destruction or bankruptcy. And the analogy of a roof in government or election funding, county commissioners, governors, federal people, well, the elections, yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. And then we have elections that don't work as well as we want. This is what I perceive as our problem. And by the way, I'm going to ask you a question, but I'm giving you friends in a second. I don't think the issue, frankly, from my standpoint, I told this to Secretary Besson, is a spending problem or a revenue problem. Every family has a problem that disciplines them. It's called a pay-for problem.
I'm a big pay for person. Back in the 70s, and 80s and 90s, you know, the pay for was a big issue. That is really the discipline, whether it's in a country or a family or an enterprise. What can you pay for? And the problem is, of course, we don't have that constraint on either side of the aisle. We have emergency funding, we have OCO funding. Some of you will remember the OCO funding, which funded our armed services without it costing anything on the debt. Of course, it was added to the debt. And I believe, I'm one of those Democrats who believes the debt that we're confronting is very significant, which is why I have such trouble understanding the proponents of that philosophy not wanting to collect everything that's due and owing so that we can pay down debt and pay for the priorities that we need. Second problem is, and I'm just ending for you, for me, I guess I've been, we tend to look in this country at the 12% thereabouts of the budget and let the 88% go. You cannot look at non-defense discretionary spending and believe you can solve a $37 trillion debt. Now, I'm going to recognize you, and I have one more thing that is totally beyond the ambit of this hearing. If you can leave me for one, but I want to ask a question about these damn advertisements I hear all the time is, call us, you owe $50,000, we'll take care of it. You talk about undermining enforcement. I've talked to Joyce about that. I want to have hearings on that. I've urged her to do so. I'm not going to do a hearing like this, but I want to, let me yield to you, Fred, if you want to say.
This is highly confidential. I'm 77. I have lived with the tax system since I started when I was 23. A long time. If you look at history, we have worshipped at the altar of the income tax system for more than 85 years. If you listen to the former chief counsel, part of the message was, it's too complicated, it just doesn't work. I believe, and I think you find if you looked around, bipartisan, including a couple of your former colleagues, two of my favorite guys, Ben Carter and Robert Workman.
Okay.
Look at what they proposed. Look at what Professor Grass proposed. The time has come, not this year, it's going to take time. But if you design a proper hybrid consumption made up of that plus order adjustability, and you design it the right way, here's everything you can do. You can finally put a cap on deficit, debt, and interest, so that over time the economy grows. It's working out. Second, you can design it to eliminate child poverty. Third, you can design it so working families and small businesses don't have to file an income. All of that is possible for people a hell of a lot smarter than me. We've been talking about it. Want to do it, including people being in this region. I know this sounds like a ridiculous thing to me, but if you look around, you might consider having some terms about it. Because imagine a world where we dramatically shrunk the tax cut.
One should note that the value-added tax exists in a lot of countries. A friend of mine used to be the Russian tax commissioner, and they gave up on the income tax because they couldn't enforce it and had a value-added tax that allowed them to monitor everything. The problem with value-added tax is it's not progressive. Rich people pay the same amount of increase in prices as poor people. So it does work. I mean, you have to, and people try to cheat as you go, but you can, with technology, the Russians have shown, I've seen the system, you can do it so that all of the money is actually appropriated, you can track, but you can't get away from the fact that what you've done is taken the progressivity out of the system, and you actually had everybody, no matter what their income came, pay the tax, and it's the same tax to them on what they buy, it's just a bigger percentage of their income.
But if you read Boardman, Cardin proposal, if you read the Grass papers, what you will see is they also propose, for example, if your income is less than 3 times the poverty rate, you get your FICA tax back. If your income is below some level, you get a child tax, an advanced child tax credit to deal exactly with the progressive.
And at that rate, the system gets to be a lot less simple, a little more complicated.
And more complexity.
But it gets you.
I will look at and read what you're talking about, and where Mr. Hoyer and I disagree. I'm not a pay-go person. I'm gonna watch if we surpass the deficit, with regard to, we're gonna see a sequester, and we will see a sequester that goes after Medicare. So, but I will read the documents, and I just, changing our tax system. You're right. It's not next year, it's not the year after, it's that we need to deal with what we have at the moment and look at how we can deal with some equity in the process and be able to deal with that. But that's, then I gotta go to the forum.
Okay, go ahead.
And talk about military.
This is a Ways and Means Committee controlled by the Republicans, and we were allowed to use it. And if I get too deeply in policy, they will never let it appropriate to use this room again. Unless you have to run out, I would really like your thoughts, because Joyce wants to have a hearing on it, agrees with me. What is your reaction to all these ads on radio mostly, of people saying, oh, you got back taxes, $10,000, we can save you half, and people getting out, they save you thousands of dollars. What does that do in terms of the incentive for others to pay their taxes?
When I was a national taxpayer advocate, we worked with several state attorney general's offices as they shut down some of these, places that were what we would call offer mills, saying, I can resolve these things for pennies on the dollars. And what we saw was people paying thousands of dollars to these firms.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosa.
So, the problem with this is that as you reduce IRS resources to actually handle offers of compromise and resolve taxpayer debt issues, decrement installment plans, the more complicated things that these taxpayers will bring in, you're going to see more scams. It's an opportunity for more of these kinds of things because they can't get through to the IRS.
And some of them say, we have a AAA rating and this, that, and the other, and
when you look at how they're handling the cases, there's no real representation of the taxpayer. They're sending out packages that are available for free on an IRS website, telling the taxpayer to fill them out, and then the taxpayer sending them back in, and then that entity just passes it on to the IRS. There's no representative involved, no advice.
Yeah, I think about the tax system is complicated, it's stressful, people are worried about it, and that creates the opportunity for people to be exploited. And it's a spectrum. At the very end of the spectrum is absolute illegal exploitation. Someone pretending to be the IRS saying you have to pay this. But then what you're seeing on the radio.
and I'm not talking about.
Yeah, I'm gonna get it. But you move along the continuum and it's like, okay, I'm gonna take advantage of the fact that you are stressed, that the IRS seems imposing. And even though you could call and get the same installment agreement that I'm gonna get for you, I'm gonna convince you that you need me and that I'm gonna take a fee on top of that. So you work with this company, meanwhile you don't realize that you could have gotten the same outcome without having to pay a fee from the IRS. And the stress that people have.
Which is of course related to service,
Yeah.
to investing in service, because that is a service.
Yes.
They're doing away with direct file, which is a service. It's crazy. Anyway, let me say this. I don't know that I've ever done this before. My frustration about the land. We oversee in the Labor Health Committee NIH. That's a $37 or $40 billion enterprise. They want to cut down to $27 billion with extraordinary consequences. Not a single NIH person has testified for the Labor Health Committee. Not one. The only witness we have is the secretary. I've been so frustrated by this, and I said, we gotta have some way to hear from people who are prepared to come and testify and give us the facts. I think by this turnout, you have a pretty highfalutin turnout here.
Yeah.
For you, because you're pretty highfalutin people. When I talked to Bob Rubin and Jack Lew, and both of them raved about all of you. So I thank you for being here. And I thank you for what you have done. And I thank you on behalf of all the employees you talked about. I represent 73,000, give or take, federal employees. And you will all say that, and some of you have been in a lot of businesses, deal with a lot of private sector. Not so much you for a long time, but private sector. And have all said the people that worked at IRS with you were people of the highest caliber and highest motivation and achieved extraordinary things. Thank you. That's it, folks. That's all there is. No fire.